Welcome to the video on employee selection, otherwise known as hiring. In this video, we will begin by exploring how we determine if a selection tool is valuable or not. We will then explore several types of tools, focusing especially on psychological tests and interviews. Finally, we will talk briefly about different strategies for combining information from multiple steps in the hiring process to ultimately make a decision. Let's start with a little selection lingo. When we go through the process of hiring people, everyone knows that we usually collect information about each applicant, but what's the purpose of doing that? The goal is to predict which applicants are most likely to be successful employees. A predictor, then, is a measure of some kind. We use a predictor when we think it will be helpful in estimating what kind of employee the applicant would be if we hired her. The information we get from the predictor tells us about the applicant's levels of KSAOs, which we've talked about before: knowledge, skills, abilities, and other characteristics. For example, if firefighters have to have good upper body strength, we can give applicants a test of physical strength. Which KSAOs we measure should come from the job analysis, so we are asking about talents that are relevant to the particular job we are hiring for. What do we hope to actually predict by going through this process? Well, important job outcomes like performance, organizational citizenship behavior, and counterproductive work behavior. These outcomes are called criteria. So what we're after when we build a hiring process are predictors which, first, do a good job of measuring the KSAOs that are important for the job, and second, do a good job of predicting the outcomes that matter to us, that is, the criteria. Here's an example for a salesperson position that outlines the process. What we might want to know, for example, is how much sales knowledge an applicant has. We would then like to confirm that greater sales knowledge is linked to better sales performance when on the job. It's pretty straightforward. But these are just ideas. In the social sciences, we call these constructs. At this stage, we haven't measured anything. They're just concepts that we have in mind. So we create measures of sales knowledge for hiring purposes. This is our predictor on the left. Then we measure sales performance by looking at employee commissions over, say, the first 6 months of employment. This is our criterion. Once we have these two measures, we can correlate them to see how closely linked test scores are to commissions. The stronger the link between the sales knowledge test and the commissions, then the better that knowledge test will be as a tool to use in hiring. Now, while we hope that our measures will tap the constructs well, they will not be perfect. How do we know if our predictors and criteria are doing a good job of measuring what they're designed to measure? We turn now to concepts in psychometrics, which is the scientific study of psychological measurement. Quality measurement means two things: reliability, which is how consistently we measure something, and validity, which refers to the accuracy of our measurement. We could talk about the details of these things for weeks, and you will if you take the Introduction to Psychological Testing course. But right now, we're just going to highlight those aspects of reliability and validity that are most relevant to selection. Let's look at reliability first. Reliability is our first index of quality. We can't do a good job of measuring something if we're not consistent in how we measure it. Think about how they measure height at the doctor's office. They use a long metal bar which is attached to a scale, and the bar has markings to indicate height. Why don't they use a tape measure instead? Well, although it would take up less space, a tape measure is less consistent because of its flexible nature. It would be harder to get a similar reading time and time again. In most cases, reliability is expressed as a correlation that varies from 0 to +1. This is called a reliability coefficient. Higher scores are better, with values of about 0.8 seen as pretty good and scores of 0.9 as quite good, although it depends on the kind of reliability that we're measuring. So what are those different types of reliability? The first is test-retest reliability. This tells you whether the test is likely to produce similar results if someone takes it twice at two different points in time. To establish this, we give the test to a group of people and then have them come back and take the test again a while later. A high correlation between the two sets of scores tells us that our measure has good test-retest reliability. We prefer a decent time interval between the two tests, usually at least a week or two. Otherwise, people's scores might change because they remember the test from the first time, and maybe they even remember their responses from the first time. What if we found that scores from time 1 to time 2 did not correlate well? What would this mean? It would tell us that a person's score might not be close to what they would score if they had taken it at a different time. This would be a troublesome situation if we are after precise, consistent measurement. The second type of reliability is internal consistency reliability. This is only relevant for measures that contain multiple items, like attitude scales or knowledge tests. Internal consistency refers to when the items that make up a measure are homogeneous and hang together well. So, for example, if you are measuring optimism with 10 items, those items should correlate positively with one another. If all 10 items measure optimism, then a person who agrees with one item should tend to also agree with the other 9 items. In other words, people's responses should be consistent from item to item and not bounce around too much. The most popular measure of internal consistency reliability is called Cronbach's alpha, or sometimes coefficient alpha. It is interpreted like a correlation, and again, higher scores closer to +1 are desirable. Lastly, we have inter-rater reliability. When we have a measure that involves a subjective judgment, this type of reliability indicates how well scores from two different judges or raters correlate with one another. This is most relevant for scores based on answers to interview questions. You'd want to know that 2 trained interviewers make very similar ratings of the responses that applicants give. So that's reliability.